Katie was lying on the sofa in a light robe after a shower. She was tired and was about to fall asleep when she suddenly felt a warm breath at her feet. It was a dog. The heroine did not attach any importance to this and relaxed, but a minute later the dog was already in her. The evening air in San Francisco carried a soft chill as Katie stood on the small balcony of her apartment, staring out over the glittering streets. Inside, her boyfriend's laughter echoed from the TV, distant, almost annoying. She tightened the blanket around her shoulders and glanced down. At her feet sat Bruno, the big black Labrador that had unexpectedly stolen her heart. Bruno wasn't supposed to be her everything. He was supposed to be just the dog, a piece of the life she shared with Nick. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Bruno started following her everywhere, his deep brown eyes full of loyalty, understanding, something almost human. When Nick forgot to text her back, when he cancelled dinner again, it was Bruno who curled up against her side, warm and steady, asking nothing, giving everything. Tonight, after another half-hearted argument, Katie had walked out onto the balcony with Bruno close behind. She sank down onto the worn wooden floor, and the big dog immediately pressed against her, resting his heavy head on her lap. She buried her fingers in his soft fur, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing, the steady beat of his heart under her hand. The way he looked at her, steady, patient, unwavering, made something in her chest ache in the sweetest way. Inside, Nick was too caught up in his game to notice she was gone. Katie smiled sadly and leaned her head against Bruno's. He smelled faintly of fresh air and a little bit of rain from their earlier walk, and the comfort of it wrapped around her like a second blanket. She stayed like that for a long time, her fingers idly stroking his fur, her heart calming with every touch. Bruno lifted his head once, bumping her chin with his nose, and when she looked into his deep, soulful eyes, she felt something spark. A pure, uncomplicated love she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. Katie laughed quietly, a soft, almost broken sound, and hugged him tightly around his thick neck. Bruno let out a low, content rumble, the kind of sound that said he understood her better than any human ever had. That night, after Nick fell asleep on the couch, Katie slipped into bed with Bruno curled up at her feet. She stretched out, feeling the warmth of his body along her legs, the steady comfort of his breathing filling the dark, quiet room. She fell asleep faster than she had in weeks, her hand resting lightly on his back. Morning crept in gently, painting the room with pale gold. Katie stirred, feeling the slight movement as Bruno adjusted his weight, his nose bumping against her hand. She blinked awake and smiled. Nick was gone, probably left early without saying a word, like he always did. But Bruno was still there. She slid down the bed, wrapping her arms around his thick body, burying her face in his fur. He responded with a slow, heavy sigh and a soft thump of his tail against the mattress. There was a warmth between them that was impossible to ignore. A bond stronger than anything she had ever felt with another person. It wasn't just companionship. It was something deeper, something fierce and beautiful. A silent promise that no matter what else changed, he would never leave her side. Katie pressed a kiss to the top of his head, whispering, "You're all I need." And for the first time in a long time, she meant it. Outside, the city moved on, busy and loud, but inside that little room, everything was perfect. Katie and Bruno, wrapped in a quiet, unbreakable love stronger than anything she had ever known. Later that morning, Katie wandered through the apartment barefoot, Bruno padding faithfully beside her. She brewed a cup of coffee, the rich scent filling the small kitchen, and leaned against the counter watching Bruno settle at her feet with a heavy sigh. Nick's jacket still hung over the back of the chair, his keys tossed carelessly on the table, but he wasn't here. And Katie didn't miss him. She sipped her coffee slowly, her hand reaching down to scratch Bruno behind the ears, feeling the way his whole body leaned into her touch. The silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. It was exactly what her heart needed. By noon, she found herself packing a small bag. She didn't plan it. Her hands just moved, grabbing clothes, a book, a few essentials. Bruno watched from the doorway, his big head tilted slightly to one side, his dark eyes following every move she made. She knelt down in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Want to get out of here?" she asked softly. Bruno didn't need words. He nudged her cheek with his nose and let out a low, eager rumble that made Katie laugh for real, the first real laugh she had felt in weeks. The two of them climbed into her car, the windows down, the salty air from the bay whipping through her hair. Bruno sat in the passenger seat, his head out the window, his tongue lolling happily, looking every bit like he belonged there, by her side. Katie drove without a plan, letting the road guide her. They ended up at a quiet stretch of beach just outside the city, where the fog curled low over the sand and the ocean whispered against the shore. She kicked off her shoes and ran barefoot into the surf, laughing as Bruno bounded after her, barking once, twice before plunging into the shallow waves. They played like that for hours, chasing each other, rolling in the wet sand, forgetting the world outside of their small, perfect moment. At one point, Katie collapsed into the sand, breathless and soaked, her heart pounding with a wild, fierce kind of happiness she hadn't felt in years. Bruno trotted over, his coat glistening with seawater, and flopped down beside her, pressing his whole warm, heavy body against hers. Katie threw her arms around him, burying her face in his damp fur. He smelled like salt and earth and home. "You're my everything," she whispered into his fur, her voice thick with emotion. "You're the only one who stayed." Bruno answered the only way he knew how, by pushing his nose against her cheek, licking away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. She lay there with him for a long time, the sky slowly shifting from grey to soft blue above them. The ocean sang its endless song, and Katie closed her eyes, feeling the rise and fall of Bruno's breathing against her side, the steady drum of his heart in tune with hers. When they finally climbed back into the car, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. Bruno rested his head on her lap as she drove back toward the city, his weight grounding her, his presence wrapping around her like a promise. Katie didn't go back to Nick's apartment. She drove to her sister's place instead, letting herself in with the spare key under the mat. A new beginning, a fresh start, just her and Bruno. That night, curled up on the couch with a blanket thrown over them, Katie stroked Bruno's ears as he drifted off to sleep beside her. She watched his chest rise and fall, feeling a deep, aching kind of love swell inside her. This was all she needed. This pure, steady, unwavering love. A love without conditions. A love without lies. And as she finally let herself drift into sleep, her hand resting on Bruno's back, she knew she had made the right choice. He wasn't just a pet. He was her heart, her home, her forever. Days turned into weeks, and life with Bruno settled into a rhythm that felt more real than anything Katie had known before. Every morning he was there, waiting by her side, his big tail thumping happily against the floor as she stretched awake. His loyalty was constant, steady, like the sun rising without fail. Katie found a small job at a local bookstore, just a few blocks from her sister's apartment. She loved the slow pace, the smell of old paper and coffee, the way the hours passed without stress or shouting. And every evening, no matter how long her day had been, Bruno was always there, waiting at the door, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw her. They explored the city together, Katie and Bruno. Golden Gate Park became their kingdom. The hidden winding trails, the open green spaces, the quiet corners where they could sit alone, away from the noise of the world. Katie would lie back in the grass with her head resting on Bruno's side, staring up at the sky, feeling a happiness so pure it almost hurt. Some nights, she'd curl up on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands, Bruno's heavy head resting on her lap. She would run her fingers through his thick, warm fur and tell him about her day, about the old woman who came into the shop looking for a book she hadn't read in 50 years, about the little boy who spent an hour picking out his very first novel. Bruno would listen, his big brown eyes focused entirely on her, as if every word she said mattered. The love she felt for him wasn't simple. It was a deep, consuming affection that wrapped around her whole heart. It was more than companionship. It was trust. It was safety. It was the kind of bond she had been searching for in all the wrong places and finally found, not in grand gestures or pretty promises, but in the quiet certainty of a loyal heart. One evening, as the city lights flickered to life below their small balcony, Katie sat with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and Bruno pressed against her side. The sky was painted with deep purples and soft golds, and a cool breeze whispered across her skin. She watched the sun dip behind the hills and felt a swell of emotion so big she had to press her hand against her chest. Bruno shifted closer, his body a solid, reassuring weight against hers. "You saved me," she said softly, her voice catching in the cool air. She rested her forehead against his, her hand cupping his broad face. "You made me believe again." Bruno let out a low, contented huff, his tail tapping a slow rhythm against the balcony floor. Katie closed her eyes and just breathed him in, the warmth, the strength, the unspoken promise that no matter what happened next, she wouldn't be alone. With him, she was enough. She was loved not for what she could give, or for how she looked, or for what she could do, but simply for existing. That night, she fell asleep with Bruno curled tightly against her, the beat of his heart a steady song in the quiet. And when she dreamed, it wasn't of lost love or broken promises. It was of open fields, endless skies, and the feeling of running free with the one soul who would never leave her side. Katie woke with the sunrise, golden light filling the small room. Bruno stirred beside her, lifting his head to nuzzle into her neck, his soft breath tickling her skin. She laughed, the sound light and easy, and pulled him closer. They didn't need anything else. Not apologies, not second chances, not promises from people who had already proven their love was thin and fragile. They had something better. They had each other. And in a world that so often disappointed, that was more than enough.